It's the Morning Star Drive 117.8. You soaring up with sky, now's the time, don't delay. I'm sitting in my ride and it's time to fly. So let's realign, just listen and feel your mind.
Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome to the MSD on 117.8. It's Tuesday, September 17th. And so happy for joining us, and we're ready to start this week together with the Lord. So subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on SoundCloud, and make sure to support us on Patreon. Today we have a very exciting podcast for you with Bible Today and 2G Talks with Rachel. All right, everyone, how are you all doing? How was this weekend? Um, Once again, it's a very late night for me again. Uh, yeah, it's been a very busy week this past week too, and because of that, I actually woke up about 30 minutes ago. It's like 1 a.m. for me on Monday morning, and I think I'm gonna have to start the day at this time, catching up on some readings physically. And I got the a text from Rachel saying that she sent her recording about an hour ago, and I remember that I was like, oh, okay, like sometime in between studying and pre-dawn, I'll record for the MSD. And I think I almost forgot about it until Rachel brought it up. So very thankful for that too. Yeah, but I think this week's message was like really, really moving, right? And this week and last week, I think these were all messages that I need to hear. And yeah, I don't know, like for you guys, like how last week's message was and how this week's message is too. Um, I think in particular last week, one of the things was about like only doing the amid of physical things, like only doing the things that you like absolutely like have to do, right? And then using the rest of your time for the spiritual things. I think this is really poignant and pertinent for me because there's been like a lot of things going on, right? Like at school and like with like the work that I have to do for classes and stuff. And so it's like physically impossible, at least currently, to do like every single possible thing. Like there's like so many things going on, right? And so I know for even for like members in like many different fields, right? Like if we only choose to prioritize the physical things, like we can never do the spiritual things, and that's how when we start to like lose out on like the great many things that we have to do in this history, right, for our faith. And yeah, that's not something that I wanted, and so I think it was really an important message, and it answered a lot of questions last week too, right? So one of the things that I got to do last week, right, if you guys saw on Instagram, like we had members visiting, and I think I mentioned this last week too, from Atlanta, Georgia, and also from Minnesota and from New York, coming down to go to like Disney World and Universal Studios and stuff. And I went to go see them last week, like when they first arrived. And then, like I think later in the week, Chris Jansen and Ina came to visit as well, right from Minnesota. And I didn't get to see them when they first arrived, and so like if possible, I wanted to go see them again because they're two people whom I'm very grateful for, right? Like our beloved Ina, like she always supports everyone on this channel. And so I met Chris a number of times, and I think I've seen Ina like in passing in the past, but never like really got to speak with her at length and spend time with her. So I was like, okay, even if it's a short time, and even though it's been so busy, if possible, I would like to go see them again. And so, like, amid anything else, even though like it was so busy last week, I think both for me as well as for the folks visiting, having fun at Universal, I was like, okay, I don't know if it's possible to go see them again, but even if it's brief, let's go do it anyways. And so I made sure that like yeah, on Friday, on Saturday, on Thursday and stuff, I was praying like the whole day. I was like, man, like do I go down like uh where all of the theme parks are when they were staying in Orlando? It's like 2 hours away by drive at least. And there were like so many like factors and considerations to consider. Like on Saturday, there's like a big football game, and so if I were to go down on Friday, then I'd be stuck probably like in Orlando, and I wouldn't be able to come back until like at least after the football game is over, right? If I didn't want to get stuck in traffic. And I heard the traffic is really bad because it's a pretty big football game. And on Friday too, uh, like when I was going down, like in line with the message about like doing the things that you are like physically that are mandatory to do, right? And then like only those things. Like at first I was like, okay, I don't. Once again, one of my classes, my only class of Friday, got canceled. So at first I was thinking like, oh, like does this mean that I can go on Thursday night and join them, right? And maybe even spend time with them on Friday. But then, like during my class on Thursday, one of the things that they told us is that if you sign up for an event and you don't show up, then consider your RSVP to like a reception with alumni to be mandatory, right? If you don't show up, then people will remember, right? And like the even officially, like in terms of the attendance, people remember that you signed up but that you didn't come. So consider that to be mandatory. So the school told me that, and so I was like, okay, so I guess I have to go. So I had signed up for something Friday evening, and so I was like, okay, I have to at least be here until Friday evening. And so, throughout that day, I got to do just the physical things that were absolutely mandatory to do. And coming back here too in time, and then on Sunday, I got to do just the mandatory things. But I got to do the spiritual things, spending time together with members, even if it's like very brief. And on Saturday, I got to spend the whole day with Chris and Ina, and everyone else went home like, early in the morning, but it was such a great time. I think one of the highlights was I don't know, there's something about like when you're in Florida, right? And I don't know if everyone knows who like isn't from the US, but Florida is the only place in the US that has both alligators and crocodiles, right? And so I think something that people want to do when they're here is to try to see an alligator, right? Like if it's not, of course, if it's not dangerous and such, but people want to like go see an alligator. And so like we kind of like were looking around the area trying to find one. Like we went to various different like kind of parks and stuff. Because any permanent body of water could have an alligator, right? So they said like yeah, like if you have a body of water that will be there like for the majority of the year, there's a chance there's an alligator there. And so right at the very end, we found like I was talking to Chris and we were just looking out at the water, and then right then an alligator happened to be swimming by. It was really small, maybe like a foot long, right? Like it was a baby. And but then we got to finally see it, and it was like really amazing to be able to see that in the wild. Yeah, and a couple of amazing things happen like throughout the week, through going to see, our members. I think the biggest thing was having service with them on the first Sunday with the members from Georgia and New York. It was the first time like having like something that had the semblance of an actual service like here in Florida. Like, because even though like we were in the hotel room and we're not at a church or anything, right? I saw the members like really diligently like setting up everything for service, like the layout of the room and such. And like it told me like I think I try to do that like here on my own too. But I could see like a different level of care that the members were putting into the setup, and it really like hit me that like wow, I should be doing this too right here, right? Like just because I'm having service like on my own in my apartment doesn't mean that I shouldn't set things up like it's a actual temple, right? In fact, I should be probably be doing a better job because I'm by myself, right? And there's no one to like make it like naturally like something that like it has a semblance of a church, right? I should put in that extra effort, right? So that was something I was very grateful for. And another thing was like we were taking pictures throughout the weekend, and I was sending them to my friends and family and members from other regions. And then like my family from Korea, they were saying like, wow, like Eddie, it seems like you fit this church really well too. And that's something that I really felt too. Like this is my first time meeting like probably half the members there. Like the whole like most of the church came from Atlanta, and I knew the guys like pretty well from the past, and they're like around my age as well. But the other members, like the head leader and the female members who came, it was my first time meeting most of them and spending time with them in this way. And I was like joking with them, right? Because they're all coming here to like go to like Disney World and Universal Studios, and like they were like all into like Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings and stuff, right? So they were all a bunch of big nerds, right? And then I was like, man, like, where has this church been? Like, where have you guys been hiding, right? Because, like growing up, those are things that I really enjoyed too. Like, one of the members, he brought like a Harry Potter trivia game. And I remember, like, dude, I haven't like read or watched Harry Potter in probably like well over like 10 years or so, right? So, but they're both things I really enjoyed. And so yeah, like it just like there were a lot of natural fun and exciting things that happened as a consequence of spending time with them, right? Even though it was a short time, like both times I think I was only with them for like a day, right? If that, right? And so it was a very short time. And I think the funniest thing was this time when I went recently on Friday to go see Chris and Ina and the other members as they were leaving. Like Friday, I was so busy. Like I was getting the work that I had to do, like get done absolutely. And then I was also trying my best to, like drive out there and get things prepared for the weekend so that I'm not like flooded with work when I come back. And so like while doing that, I didn't really get to eat on Friday, right? So I was like pretty hungry. I made like a banana shake, right? And froze slash like refrigerated it, and I put it into a cooler bag in my trunk, right? And I was like, okay, like it's relatively cold. I think it should hold. I think it should be okay. But I had like this reception networking event with alumni from the law school, and that lasted for about an hour and a half or 2 hours. And I was like, at first, I was like, okay, I think this should be okay. And so my plan was to leave as soon as the reception was over and head down to see our members. And so I was just gonna head straight from the school. But as I got there, I had to go back home briefly, but then like I briefly changed and I was like rushing out the door, right? So I pulled out the banana shake and I was drinking it and I was like it tasted like completely fine, but like the color, like how bananas can like get right and oxidize like very quickly. So it got like very dark, and the banana part and the water, it separated right in the course of the 2 hours. Like I don't know if you've made like a shake with a banana before, but if you don't drink it right away, sometimes it separates like right, it de-emulsifies like from the original state it was in. But it looked fine and it tasted okay, but every time I smelled it, it smelled a bit sour, right? It's like okay, I don't think this is good. I think this is like I shouldn't keep drinking this. I don't know what's gonna happen if I drink the whole thing. So that's like pretty much all I had on that day. And so I was like, okay, this isn't good. So I got to Orlando, 2 hours away. It was like 9:30 p.m. And so in my mind, I was like, man, like I feel like the members probably ate already at this point, right? Like it's way past dinner time too. They were on the move. It's like, oh, I'm sure that they ate something already, like at the park. And so I was like waiting, and I was like, okay, like if they did eat something, then I'll go get something like by myself. But I was like, God, okay. I prayed to God. I think, and I told God, like, God, like, did they eat? Like, should I be going to get food? Like, what should I be doing right now? And so I was like waiting, and God answered the prayer in like such a funny way, right? Like, even the first week when I had gone, the first thing that they did like after a while was to go get groceries nearby at a grocery store, and they got so much food, right? The head leader was like when like she kept joking like, are we planning to stay here for a month, right? Because there was a lot of food, right? And I think throughout the week they got even more groceries right after I left. And so it was really funny the first time, and I was like, whoa, like, this is a lot of food. And like they were already joking, saying that yeah, if there's anything left over, then Eddie can just take it and keep it here. And so like, but yeah, when I came back, that is actually what I ended up doing, right? Like, I ended up taking everything that they had left because they can't really take it on a flight. So like, I came back and I posted it on Instagram too. but I'm looking at my fridge and I think there's like enough food here to last me like the rest of like the remainder of this like year at least for 2024. And so it was really funny, right? Like God answered my prayer, right? And like he, like, as like last week's message was saying, right? Like when the time comes, God will answer your prayers, right? So he didn't just give me food for that one evening and for that single time that I was hungry, but he really provided food for like that's gonna last me weeks and months. And so I was really grateful to God about that too, right? And so I think this is just a very physical way of how like God takes care of us too. And I think that's in line with this week's message as well. Yes, there will be times of hardship and suffering and stuff too. But I think one thing that for those of us who are here that came from this week's message, I think is really, really amazing is that the suffering that we go through is as a consequence of lifting ourselves and pulling ourselves out of that tribulation and out of that suffering, right? But the suffering that the wicked go through is the actual tribulation and the ultimate loss that they will face, right? And the torment of hell that they will go through. And so like I was really thankful for God, like from that one thing, but also being able to spend time with our members. And I think I remember mentioning last week that I was like really praying to God, like saying like, okay, God, like what is the purpose behind doing this and doing that, right? Like of going to see the members too. I know that if I'm just gonna go to enjoy myself and have fun, like that's only my purpose. But God, I know that in all of the times that we spend together with our brothers and our sisters and in anything that we do, if we look for your will and try to accomplish the things that you want to do, there's a greater meaning and purpose, and even we benefit so much more as a result. So I pray for that last week, and I pray for that this week as well. And that's once again my prayer for today and for all of our members of Providence, and for Rachel doing 2G talks, for Pastor Sky, and for everyone listening at home too. So for the rest of today, we have Bible today and 2G talks. And so right as we get into Bible today, we'll go into our first break with Natural Tempo. Yes, so for Bible today, I kind of want to drill into something specific. I think this is really interesting from this week's message. Like, I don't know for you guys, like, what kind of things really stood out. This whole message was really impactful, right? Even from like each of the Bible figures, that's something we spoke about. And he really went into the Elijah story, right, to some degree too. And it was like kind of like drilling into the things of like what we choose to look at, right? Like people choose to only look at things from like one perspective, and in particular like a very human perspective, right? Like and like as that has to do with like, some kind of science or some kind of academic study or some kind of belief and political belief, even belief in idols, as like the determinative like way to view how things happen, right? But most of the time, like people tend to view things without God and without thinking about like God's will behind it, right? And so I think it was really like shocking for those reasons, right? And so like he mentioned, like cause and result, like condition and reward, right? Like look at the earthly side and the heavenly side, right? Along with like sin and punishment, as the message said. And this cause and result thing, like I know that's been emphasized, I think several times over the last few months, and I think this is like one of the first times that I've seen it as like the major title for the message. And I think this is really interesting. And in particular, this has been interesting for me, like, and I would love to hear what you guys have to say on this too. But like being in law school so far, and I think I may have shared this before, but in classes, all we do is read through like the most controversial Supreme Court cases, like here in the United States, right? Like that's like pretty much like the bulk of what we do. And part of the explanation for that is all of the most controversial ones, they're the ones where like it's really gray, right? It's not clear what to do. Like for the ones where there's kind of a clear answer one way or the other, and that no one would disagree, right? Like if you look at the US Supreme Court, there are 9 Supreme Court justices, right? So if they can all agree on it, or like let's say like a vast majority of them can agree on it, or even if like at one point in history, like some people may disagree, if the vast majority of people would agree on it, then it's not that controversial and there's not really much for us to discuss, right? You can kind of like see how even you would react in that scenario. But if it's like a highly contentious thing, if it's a really gray area, and oftentimes if it's very political, then you can kind of argue one way or the other. And so all of the classes that we have been taking so far and learning have been in that area. And I think it makes it really challenging for that reason. And I'll say more than anything that being someone from Providence, right, that's kind of like something that is even trickier for us, I would say, right? Like dealing with these kinds of matters, right? Like I remember in class, like one of the professors, like they always try to get us to think and to answer, right? And so like they asked the question, like there's a big case about being like a bystander, and like in part of this, there's a big case that people talk about where these young kids, they were sorry, this might be a little graphic for people at home, but some of these like young kind of like teenage kids, they were watching a man drown, and I think this man, he has some disabilities and stuff, so they were watching him drown like in a body of water, and they didn't help him, and they recorded it on video actually. And so you could hear them on the video. I didn't watch it, and I encourage people not to watch it. I think it might be kind of gruesome. But like they watch him drown and they're laughing, right? And eventually when he completely drowns, like one of the kids' voices, like you can hear them say like, "Oh, he drowned," right? And they continue to laugh. So it's very, very like challenging material. And like the questions that they'll ask you is like, okay, like what should we do about this? Like, should we legally punish this? Like, should these kids be charged of a crime? Right? Like, if like there are like good Samaritan laws in the US, and maybe in other countries, I'm not sure what those countries are like, right? Where if you as a bystander, you help someone, but you unintentionally hurt them, that you're actually legally protected, right? To some degree, right? If it wasn't like grossly negligent or something. But a lot of countries and a lot of states have bad Samaritan laws too, where like if you could have helped but you didn't under like particular like circumstances, then you may be criminally liable as well, right? You may be charged with the demeanor. And so, like that's part of the question. Like, should they be charged, right? Like, they don't. Do you have a legal duty to help this person, right? Like, as a, I think everyone in class, like, not just people who are in Providence, would look at that and say, oh, this person has a moral duty to act and a moral duty to save these people. But legally, can the state like require you to act in any of these circumstances? Like, there are some defenses like in certain scenarios where someone shouldn't be made to do so, right? Like I think the common like exceptions to like, oh, when you don't need to help someone is if it would put you or someone else at peril, right? Or if there's just nothing that you can do, right? Or if like there's someone else who's helping on the scene, right? Or who can help on the scene, right? So there's like a number of different times where there are exceptions, but barring the exceptions, like if you can reasonably help someone, like should you? Right. And so, like, they asked us this question, and they asked, my professor asked me this in class, and I was like, I really don't know. Right. Like, I don't know how I would tailor a statute that's like purposely like this. Right. And I think, amid other considerations, like for me, the big thing is like the country like forcing us to do something, right? The state forcing us to do something is something that I'm generally against, because we've seen like throughout the history of mankind like what that's like, right? Like where like the state is telling us to act in a certain way, and they act against in particular religion and faith, and like it was so hard to be a Christian and so hard to practice this faith and belief in God for the vast majority of the world for such a long time, right? It was something that we absolutely had to fight for, right? But of course, in this specific scenario, right, you're like, okay, maybe in this scenario, it's reasonable for there to be a legal duty like made in this way. But I think the common argument that we take is like, okay, but where do we like draw the line, right? And so like there's also all of these kind of considerations, and so it's tough material, right? And I think the kids in class who don't like no don't necessarily deal with this mentally, they can answer the questions a lot better. Like they can deal with the hypotheticals and try to come up with the law that would punish those kids without like other considerations, without external factors. But I think I also noticed mostly that the people who've lived outside in life and have had like work and different things already, that they kind of take a much more pragmatic approach, right? And they can't just deal with just the hypothetical, and then they like think about the consequences that are other actions, right? Right, like the cause and the result, the conditions and the reward, right? The sin and the punishment tied to just thinking in that kind of way. And so I thought that was really interesting. But one of the things that came up for me from this week's message was thinking about like how something was telling us to look at both the earthly side and the heavenly side. Like look for God's will behind it, right? Like that's what the message was saying, right? Like speak knowing God's will and do things like knowing God's will. And so like for me, one thing that came to mind after seeing that was, okay, like now when I read these cases, and like just as a matter of like for the study of law and like for the things that I'm doing, I'm gonna pray to God for like as I go through this material and think about like God, like what your will is, God, right? Like for this country and for these laws, and how we can uphold it in a manner that's like according to providence, right? Because one thing that I also don't want to do is to bend the law, right, just towards like in a way like that would be favorable to to me or to any one group, right? And so like even that reminds me of and like being involved in like all like the political and the legal world, like it reminds me even of John the Baptist, right? Like he at the time was like a very prominent and important figure, right? Like in that part of the world. But even he was someone who God did not want involved in politics. And even Jesus warned him and told him not to be involved in politics too. But he found himself entrenched into that, and he found himself in unnecessary trouble with the physical and with the political. And I think that is something that tends to happen for each of us too, if we like go too far into politics and other things. And so I was like, okay, God, like let me look to the heavenly things in this. Let me look to your will in this. And so, and also as I read these cases, let me also repent on behalf of my country as I read this, on behalf of this case, and on behalf of these things. Like these things are very real, and they're present, and they will be present within our lifetime. But I know that they won't be important for the 1,000 years. And not just that, like through all of these things, like let me try to pray for whatever your will is, like through all of this. So that was part of that. And also it was like, okay, let's like look for the things that God is doing amid all of this. Yeah, and so like kind of related to this too, it also dawned on me that, as the people who know, right? Because one of the other things to send a message was that for the people who like God wants to use like his will, right? He like God tells the one who knows his will secretly, right? So that they will know. Right. And so like for like the man in mission, and also for those who follow the history, right, God tells his will to, right? And so I think something common, right, for everyone, like when you come to Providence, it's like, oh my gosh, like you figure out what God's purpose is. And it's challenging because the design of the world doesn't casually fit, right, on top of what God's will is, right? People look at things, like one of the examples that they gave was about global warming, was about like Baal, right? Even at the time of King Ahab. And I'm sure you can find like the modern equivalents of some of those like things too, right? Like people in the world, they view an entire thing like through the lens of one thing, like with global warming, right? And so it's not that global warming like as a meteorological and as a weather and natural related thing, like the premise and the science of it doesn't make sense, but people fail to really look at the root cause, right? And in terms of looking at the result, like they kind of skew it towards a way that they understand. And like, just by virtue of like only like not looking at and not understanding what God is doing, like they kind of act in a way that doesn't really get to the root of it, right? So a lot of people who complain about things in the world, they don't know what they need to fix, right? They don't know what sins they need to repent for. They don't know what idols they need to discard. They don't know what kind of reasoning they must get rid of in order to actually fix the things that they need to do. And so for me, like that kind of like led to something, right? Like, um, I'll be honest. So I think I can be kind of straightforward with this, and hopefully a lot of people like take this to heart too, because I think this is something kind of like very profound for me, and I think it's something that many people may have thought for themselves, but I think it's something that more than just thinking about, that we should put into practice. And that if we put this into practice, our other problems and the bigger problems and the things of providence will be resolved too. Right, so there's like two things to this, right? Like one of the things that we see is like with the Holy Spirit letters and with the messages that have been coming out, Sonsingnim and the Trinity have been directly warning us about the actions that some people have been taking, right? And of course, we can't just look at those people and be like, oh my gosh, like, why are they doing that? But realize that some of our actions may be causing our brothers and sisters harm as well, right? Like if not today, like they may have at some point in the past. And if we don't look after our actions, and if we don't make sure that, we're not doing things against God's will, then we may do things that cause harm to Providence history and to something and to each other as well, right? So I think that's something that we have to be careful of, right? Like something was telling us in one of the more recent Holy Spirit letters about people publishing like this book, right? I have no idea like what the context behind it, but like about some of the doctrines of Providence, and they're kind of like misrepresenting Providence. And I think that's something that can easily happen, right? Like one of the things that Sensei did tell us is to write books, but especially like I guess this makes sense, right? If you're talking about something that specifically it has to do with the doctrines of Providence, right? Like can you present the doctrines in a way that is perfect and clear? right? And that represents everything, right? Is it God's will for you to do that? And so something was telling us no, right? Like that book misrepresents like what the 30 principles and what the word is about. And so in the same way, like, I felt for myself that there were some things that I need to make sure that I don't do, right, in terms of my actions. Like one of the things, right, is like I really care for members, right, like for everyone. And so as I get to meet more province members and I hear their stories and their plights, there's certain things that you want to do to take care of them, right? But there's certain actions that are appropriate and some certain things that aren't. And I share this, like, just being completely honest, because I feel as though that I hope that many people can learn through this. And like, if you find yourself in an equivalent situation, that we can really pray and make sure that we don't do something that like we we shouldn't be. Right. So one of the things that came to mind is that for myself, like as I meet more people, there are also female members, right? Like throughout Providence, like whether it's in AP or different churches, or even in other countries too, that I start to talk to about various things, like various province related matters, and many of the kind of issues and problems that they do have, we do want to help each other out, right? But because it's like a conversation between the opposite sex, there's always this kind of limit that must not be crossed, and things that should be handled in a way that's very like above board. But it's not once or twice where issues have arisen because of this kind of thing, right? And so like this isn't one thing or the other, but this came to mind because recently the guys here in American Providence, like we've been doing more things together, and I think we've been setting a lot of condition, right, in terms of prayer and all of these things. And so there's been this sudden like upspike of lives, actually, right, like that the guys have been like finding. And this has been really amazing. So like in our group chat, like one person posted saying like, hey, like there's these newcomers that are learning, who I'm going to be teaching for the first time this week. Can you pray for them? And as soon as they said that, like 4 or 5 other guys from different regions were like, oh my gosh, like that's so amazing, right? Like also this happened here too, right? Like there's this life, right? There's this person, and there's also these family members, right? My family members, like, and they're a lot of times their moms were going to learn the word, or come to church and stuff, and we're like, dude, that's so amazing. And so this is kind of like all happening all at once. And so I do feel that like guys can do well, right? And like that we've been setting that condition and that foundation for guys to do really well, like here in American Providence and all across the world too. Right? I think one of the concerns that a lot of female members have, like across the world, is that there aren't enough guys, right? And so like that's something that even Celine has talked about too, right? And so like as we go into things like with the future and with the blessing, it is a valid concern and a big thing. And I know that it's a thing that female members complain about, maybe justifiably so in a lot of ways, right? But when we go too far down that rabbit hole and too far down into that level of complaint, then it can lead to issues, right? Both for guys and for girls. And so I really realized that actually the way that I can help resolve some of these problems that are the female members in Providence go through as a consequence of the lack of guys, is that I can raise guys, right? Like, so instead of just trying to resolve the female members issues directly, the best way that I can help in that realm of Providence is to help these guys. Because when we were working together with these guys and taking care of them and working together with them on the Lord's behalf, all of these lives started to appear, right? Like all throughout American Providence. Like, and I was even sharing with you guys a couple weeks after the soccer tournament too, that like the kids that I've been evangelizing and teaching, like the JS kids, I found someone who may be able to take over and keep lecturing them. And that came from just attending a Providence event and like praying for it and taking action on it. And it wasn't just something that I willed on my own or that any person did, but it was like this message said, we saw God's will behind it. And so I was like, okay, this is showing me that if I take care of the male department, like together with the members who are working in that, then it'll resolve a larger problem in Providence, right? This disparity between like guys and girls and such. And it, without anyone dealing with the disparity, right? Like without anyone going to that matter and thinking that the way to address, right, the difference between men and women and the number of guys and girls and the position and the like the role of guys and girls within province, like without thinking that the way to address that is to go to that kind of that large like obscure level, right? But the true answer is to go down all the way to the level of like, okay, let's do what is absolutely right, and let's focus on this one thing of taking care of male members so that we can grow, evangelize, take on different roles, like alleviate some of the grievances that maybe that Providence has because of our inaction, because of things that we have to fix, and maybe some of the grievances even with respect to things of the blessing and the concerns that female members do have about the lack of guys, right? Like, I don't think the solution to the problem is to go to the girls and to help them to just see the other side. Of course, sometimes that is necessary as well. But yeah, like that wasn't the right way, right? Like I can see that becoming messier and problematic more as the time goes by, right? So that was just something that came to mind, right? And so it wasn't just related to that, but I see that all of the things of the Trinity's hearts, right? Like they become resolved if we do the work that we must do, right? If I like whatever mission that we have, sometimes you may think that it's like kind of small or you're not sure how it plays into the big picture. I think that's something that especially a lot of young people and a lot of guys like tend to have, and maybe women too, like when you think about like, oh, like is my mission, is that really helping Providence? Is it really resolving the big things? Right? Sometimes like now we may be looking at the big things being like the trial or like the current state of Providence and things like that. And you throwing like, oh, does my mission in XYZ, in praise, in cleaning the church, in taking care of lives, like in teaching the Milky Way or the SS, does it really resolve the big picture thing? And I think from this example, I saw that it really does. Like the way to take care of what the Trinity wants for all of the world is to handle your mission and to think about God's will, like through the things that you're doing. And so from this one example of taking care of male members, like the thing of like taking care of SS and second gen came to mind for me, because I was like, wow, okay, so if I do this on the Lord's behalf, then like really so many things can happen as a consequence of the small thing, right? So I'm constantly grateful for the things that we experience and the things that something went through too, right? The fact that the first thing that something did was to be a Sunday school teacher too, and through that he learned, right? Like that even taking care of these small individual people and these kids is a really big thing, right? And he employs the things that he learned through that process in taking care of all of Providence now, right? Like in a way, like when you're taking care of people, it's really like taking care of kids, right? And like and taking care of people in Providence, right? Like you can't do certain things to upset them too much. Like even if you're doing it out of a place of care, because 99% of the time, like the reason that people die in their faith or they suffer is because of like what they believe to be mistreatment, right? Or things are too tough or too strong or it's like too heavy-handed. And like even if you're well-meaning, right, like which a lot of times leaders are, and I think things are getting better with this too. But yeah, like especially when we're new and we feel like, oh, we're doing this for God, we're doing this for something, we're doing this for the Trinity, we're doing this for Jesus and for Providence. You tend to be a bit heavy-handed, right? And I've definitely done this too, and I've experienced this from other leaders as well. But then when you like start to deal with like kids, right, like Milky Way, even like kids who are not yet in like elementary school. And then when you're dealing with SS, you realize how much more patient that you have to be, what kind of heart you need to have, and like how the first thing that you have to do is be patient. The second thing you have to do is be patient. The third thing and the last thing that you have to do is to be patient, right? Like even if you feel like you were patient for 10 years, uh, if the goal is to be patient for 20 years, then you've only done 50%, right? And you might wonder like, oh, at what point does this get better? But the thing is, like, that's according to God's timing, right? And God has the answers, and the things will work out. And I do guarantee, and because we have seen this many times before, that like if you are patient, then the day will come when whoever you're taking care of, whether it's the Milky Way, whether it's an SS, a second gen, or a newcomer, the day will come when they realize, right, on their own, like through everything that God has taught them, and like let's say you put in all of that work and it doesn't work out in some way, in some instance, then that person will bear the costs of that, right? Like as long as we did our responsibility of teaching and helping them to know, then they are responsible for the results of their actions. And so yeah, like so. I think that's something that came up from this week's message for me, like to look at things spiritually and to look at the things that we must do, and seeing God's will through all of that. Okay, and so with that, we will wrap up Bible today for this week, and we will go into our second break, and we will be wrapping up with the second episode of the 2G Talk segment with Rachel. And so I'm really thankful for her for taking on this role once again, and I'm very, very excited to hear what she has to say for this week too. Uh, and I saw that she's like much more organized than I am in a lot of ways. And so I think that will produce and spawn a very new like way of thinking about a lot of these things. So I'm very excited to have her on, and thankful for her support too. Like it was so funny, like during the Labor Day weekend, I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but when we were having the soccer tournament, at some point I saw her like sitting down in a chair, like doing something with a bunch of papers. And it turns out like she was grading, right? Like I think she mentioned last week that she's a high school teacher now, right? And I did make a joke about that last time, but she brought her her assignments that her students did for grading like for that time, and like if you didn't know, it looked really studious. Like if you didn't know what she was doing, she looked like she was like busy like doing I don't know, doing something like for class or for something like that. Like she herself could be the student. And so it seemed very organized, and I'm very thankful, not just for her, but for all of the people in Providence who do like various kinds of work and are very organized in their own way and have their own set of creative faculties. And like yeah, like as we said, like being in Providence and there just being so many more female members, we see like the great strength of a lot of our female members. I'm very thankful for it too, right? So but I know that the way to make Providence better and shine more is to do my responsibility as a male member and understand that the female members are doing very great things too. But I'm really grateful, and I'm also grateful to have more representation of of the female members like on this segment, and for 2G Talks too, because I think one thing that I've seen is that yes, we share a lot of common experiences because we are all second gen, but there are differences, right? Like even the same event, right? One of the things that I spoke about at a recent meeting with AP leaders and members is that like even when you look on Instagram, right, for the same event, for the same like moment of time, right? Like people will have different things that they saw, right? And people will have different impressions and different ideas and different reactions to the same event, right? So like during the soccer tournament, like I know that Rachel and some of the girls were taking a lot of photos, right? And they're so different from what the guys were looking at, or what the guys would even think of looking at. And so it's really, really interesting, right? And I think that's something that you can all see, right? Like even on Instagram, like within your own church members, you're like, whoa, like this person posted this thing, right? From the same event that I was at, right? They were doing X, Y, and Z when I was doing A, B, and C. And so I think it's really interesting. I'm really excited to hear what she has to say. So with this, we'll get into our second break for today, and then we will hand it off with Rachel for 2G Talks.
hear their words, what they observe. Look at his life, he is happy for sure. Yes, that is right. I know I live the most happy life. Happiness should never fade, it should last eternally. That is joy. Holy Spirit and Son, I'm really happy, right? They agree, yes, you are happy indeed. I hear their words, what they observe. People can say what they want about me. Their thoughts are wrong. They don't know, they don't understand. Although this path may be hard, I will take this glorious path, the path of life. Holy Spirit and Son, I'm really happy, right? They agree, yes, you are happy indeed. Happiness should never fade, it should last eternally. That is joy. Happiness should never fade, it should last eternally. That is joy. Holy Spirit and Son, I'm really happy, right? They agree, yes, you are happy indeed. They agree, yes, you are happy indeed.
Happy Tuesday! Rachel here again for 2G Talks. I hope you had a wonderful weekend and start to your week. For this week, I thought to further solidify my place in 2G Talks by sharing some stories. But before I do that, please make sure to like and comment, for I would especially love to hear your thoughts and comments on what you think second gen are like. Or I should say, how you view them. This is going to be kind of like our first topic of the day. Because for myself, over the years, I have met many people who have all had differing opinions on what second gen are like. I'll of course begin with my assumptions here that most people probably view second gen as very precious. Maybe a little different, perhaps holier than thou, maybe. Again, I'm not sure how you view second gen, so I am curious to hear. One time, I even met a person who viewed every single second gen almost as a celebrity, which is kind of funny, a little weird. I mean, they freaked out when they learned that I was one. You know, perhaps I don't give off the typical second gen vibe. I don't know, who knows? I mean, even when we went to the American Providence tour in Korea, other second gen there were so shocked to learn that I was a second gen too. Like, excuse me? I mean, maybe it's because I'm older, as I am the first second gen to be born in American Providence. And I would like to clarify, obviously there's older second gen than me here in America. You know, look at people like Eddie. He's ancient. No, I'm kidding. But for myself, I am grateful to be able to represent my fellow American-born second gen. And being the oldest, it is incredible to see the different age ranges. I am currently 24, and even at my church, we have second gen that were born just a few months ago. So again, whenever I think of, or when I see other second gen, for me, the first thing that comes to mind is hope. Just second gen existing whether they are struggling or not. I can't help but see hope for the future. Here are precious brides that were born in this history, people who have deeply ingrained morals and ideas. Again, even if that second gen is someone who is struggling or who doesn't believe, within them, whether they want it or not, they carry a piece of providence in their hearts. A second gen with great faith is fantastic and a standard in this history. But a second gen who is struggling is still a part of God's history and purpose. Through their existence, even in the world, we're able to extend our outreach of providence, planting the seed of the word as individuals of sound morals and ideals. God's will always be fulfilled. Of course, it would be ideal if all second gens stayed in providence and had great faith. Don't get me wrong. But today, I did just want to focus on the positive sides of things, the hope. Especially with this week's message, it was a message about judgment. If you remember the title this week, it was 2 titles. The first was Speak, Knowing the Will of God, the Fundamental Being. And the second, Condition and Reward, Sin and Punishment. In the message, God spoke about the many different prophets, Noah, Moses, Elijah, all those that struggled and suffered for the sake of God's history. He said that to those who sin, God said he would judge. But to the righteous, God said he would love them to even the 1,000th generation. And you can see that in Exodus 25 verse 6, which is a scripture from the message, which reads, "For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments." It's in this history, too, we are witnesses to this promise. Not only second gen, but I do mean it for all members, SS, campus, career, JS, blessed, and everyone in this history. We are all descendants of faith from Abraham. In the Bible, God says to Abraham that he would love him, that he would allow his generations to become as numerous as the stars. God loved Abraham so much that he promised to be with his future generations, even when Abraham passed on. And it's the same for all of us. We're all people that God loves so tremendously. I found this incredible statistic to actually put this great love into perspective. And if you really, really think about it, in order for you to be born, and get ready, this statistic is quite long, you needed 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, 16 second great-grandparents, 32 third great-grandparents, 64 fourth great-grandparents, 128 fifth great-grandparents, 256 sixth great-grandparents, 512 seventh great-grandparents, 1,024 eighth great-grandparents, and 2,048 ninth great-grandparents. For you to be born today, you needed a total of about 4,094 ancestors over the last 400 years. Think about their struggles. How many battles, how many difficulties did they face? What were their sadnesses like? Their happiness? How many different love stories? How many expressions of hope did our ancestors have to go through for all of us, for you to exist at this time? And I love this quote too that I found, which reads, "Realize that your face is the result of thousands of generations falling in love." Isn't that amazing? What's more amazing is that is actually quoted from a TikTok that I saw. Yes, very Gen Z of me, I know. But the fact remains, God has kept his promise for thousands of years ago that he kept to one person, Abraham, which has now been manifested in you, either being born or coming to this history. Of course, one day I hope to hear your stories, your personal stories on how you came to this history. And maybe even one day in heaven we'll all be able to go and see and hear our 2048 ninth great-grandparent stories, what their world was like, how through their lives, their stories, how it led us to this one history. But for now, since it's just me, I only have my parents' story. So before I share my own personal story, I wanted to pay homage to the world before my own. So today, I will be sharing my mother's story. This will be a part 1 of 2 in regards to her story as someone who set an extreme condition in allowing me to be born in this history. So starting, my mother was born January 12th, 1972. She grew up in a Catholic family. Very traditional, very old school. My mother's Mexican, so when something is old school, we like to call it machismo, which is the belief or the idea that men are in charge and women are simply expected to get married, have babies, and then work in the kitchen. Another important aspect of my family on my mother's side is that, although quite religious, depression is somewhat of a generational curse. This is especially prominent when one of her brothers, my uncle, planned to take his own life. Of course, he was stopped, thankfully, by a knock at the door. This knock was actually by a Jehovah's Witness. And because he was saved by this Jehovah's Witness, he then left the Catholic faith and converted to Jehovah's Witness, while also indoctrinating about half of the family. My abuelo and my abuela, which are my grandpa and grandma, respectively, now had become parts of different faiths. My grandmother, or my abuela, converted to Jehovah's Witness, while my abuelo, my grandpa, remained a devout Catholic. This caused a great stress in my family, and it split the family into 2 opposing sides. Lost and pulled in 2 different directions, my mother at the time looked for solace. She began searching for God on her own. She made it her life's mission to find God. She knew all about the Catholic ideals from growing up, but struggled to accept them. They could never answer her questions. They called her a little faith when she had a question, and they just strictly told her to believe. She tried even learning with the Jehovah's Witnesses, but would get into fights with them over how literally they believed in the scripture. She even became best friends with a Mormon and joined their morning Bible studies. She knew that Jesus was coming back soon, so she had to find the truth right away. She's recounted to me on many occasions how she would always make sure that there was a window wherever she was so that she could fly out of it when the rapture came. She'd take incredibly quick showers just in case, so that if the rapture came, she wouldn't be caught up naked into the air. Of course, this is what she really did believe in the past. And so at the time, while looking for the truth and searching for it, she deemed Catholics, Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, many other religions to just be full of imperfections. So she hoped that going to college would help her to continue in her pursuit for the truth, while also allowing her to be the first in her family ever to go. My abuelo, again my grandfather, though had other ideas for my mother's future. Senior year in high school, when my mother was starting to seriously look at different prospective colleges, my abuelo came and told her, "Good news, chata, you won't need to worry about money, and you don't need to go to college. I have found a husband for you." He then proceeded to tell her about a colleague of his, a hard-working man in the fields, wise in his years, someone who would provide for her, a man in his late 30s, a perfect spouse for his 17-year-old daughter. Immediately, my mother refused. They argued back and forth, but she was adamant that she was going to college. He laughed in her face. He knew money was tight, and that even with all of her scholarships, she would not be able to afford it. And so he attempted to reason with her that her best option at a happy life would simply be to marry. She fought back and ended their argument with a compromise. He agreed that if she could find a job that would support her through college, then he would allow her to go. So with haste, she began looking. Eventually, she found a great opportunity. Immediately, she went to her father with this new possibility and told him that she would like to apply to become a firefighter. He laughed in her face. Now, if you don't know, my mother, she's about 5'3", and weighed about 100 pounds at the time. I'm sorry for my international listeners. I'm American, so everything is in feet and inches and pounds. I don't know about kilograms or centimeters. But essentially, she was so small that a strong gust of wind could essentially carry her away. No way would she be able to become a firefighter. But my mother was determined and persistent. Since she was a minor, though, she needed parental admission for firefighter training, which essentially would allow her to go live in the woods with a bunch of grown firemen for the week so that they could train. After hearing that this is what the firefighter training would be, my grandfather was firmly against her going and would not allow it. They fought, they screamed at each other. My mother eventually ran off in tears. This was her one chance at freedom, to escape this arranged marriage that she had been forced into. As my abuelo walked away, my uncles approached him. They told him that there was a better way to play this so-called game that my mother was playing, a way that would allow him to win the love and affection of his daughter back, while also teaching her what her place was. They told my grandfather that he should sign her permission slip and let her go, because if he were to let my mother go, she would then be so grateful to him and indebted. A true blessing in disguise. It was a fail-proof plan, for obviously my mother would fail. She would not pass the training. And through not passing the training, she would become humbled and humiliated. She would not then be able to afford to go to college, and she would eventually learn her true rightful place. So after hearing this plan, my abuelo agreed, signed the waiver, and then let my mother go to firefighter training. So sorry, I can't help myself. I think I'm going to leave it here on a cliffhanger. Next week, I promise that I will wrap up my mother's story and share a bit of my father's story as well. Feel free to leave a comment on what you think happens next. Do you think she succeeds in firefighter training? Let me know. Trust me, though, it's a wild ride from here on out. I assure you. Now, although I am ending 2G Talks a little abruptly today, I would like to implore everyone, if you haven't already, to take a look into your family line. As we all know, we're all chosen from countless stars. We're all here for a purpose and a reason. Not only because of your condition, but that of the love and faith from your family. As a second gen, I will never be able to understand what it's like to not have my family in Providence, to not have that support. I can only kind of vaguely imagine. But even if this is the case, I hope you can gain some solace and be reminded again in knowing that through the generations of love, because of your parents and their parents and so on, it is because of them that you are here now. They are a part of you as much as you are a part of them. Honestly, whether they know it or not, they're essentially in Providence, supporting you without even knowing it, by setting the condition for you to be here today. So because of that, everyone, good job. I hope that throughout this week, you can still feel God's love, even through difficult times of trials and judgment. And just be reminded that you really aren't alone. So with that, I'd like to wrap up 2G Talks today. I do hope that you have a great rest of your day, and let's chat next week too, yeah? Have a good one.
In my ride and it's time to fly, so let's realign. Just listen and fill your mind. I'm burning with desire and the passion. Nobody me when I'm like this. I got my head in the zone, you know. I'm on the Morning Star drive, you know.